The first time I heard the tapping on my bedroom window, it didn't scare me. It was late afternoon, around 4:12 p.m., when the sunlight still filled the apartment complex courtyard and people were walking their dogs below. The sound was soft, slow, and deliberate, like someone gently testing the glass with a fingernail. Tap. Tap. Pause. Tap. Tap. At first I thought it was a branch or maybe a loose cable from the building brushing against the window. But when I stepped closer, I noticed something strange. There were no trees near my window, and the cables ran along the opposite wall. The tapping stopped the moment I reached the glass. I stood there for a few seconds staring outside at the narrow gap between my building and the next one. It was barely wide enough for sunlight to squeeze through. Just a thin vertical corridor of brick and shadow. Nothing moved down there. I told myself it was probably a bird. Still, something about the rhythm stayed in my head the rest of the evening. It wasn't random like wind or wings. It sounded careful. Measured. That night, I forgot about it completely until it happened again. The second time, the tapping came at exactly 4:12 in the morning. Tap. Pause. Tap. Tap. I woke up instantly because the sound was so close to my head. My bed sits right under the window, and the glass is less than 2 feet from where I sleep. At first I thought I had imagined it. Then it came again. Tap. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just precis. If you're listening to this story right now on I want you to imagine lying in a dark room where the only thing you can hear is a single fingernail touching glass right beside your head. And before we go further, if you enjoy psychological horror like this, make sure you like the video and subscribe to Unblinking, because this channel is where we explore the quiet fears people rarely talk about. The tapping stopped again the moment I sat up. I looked outside but saw nothing except darkness and the faint glow from a security light to floors below. The narrow space between buildings looked empty. No balcony. No ledge. Nowhere for someone to stand. Still, something about it felt deliberate. The next morning I convinced myself it had been a dream mixed with outside noise. Sleep deprivation can do strange things, and I'd been working late shifts at the ferry terminal for weeks. When you spend nights around engines and water, your brain sometimes invents sounds after you come home. But the tapping returned the next afternoon. For 12 p.m. exactly. Tap. Pause. Tap. Tap. This time, I didn't move right away. I stayed perfectly still in my bed and listened. The sound continued slowly, almost like someone waiting for me to react. Tap. Tap. Then silence. I walked to the window and pressed my forehead against the glass. The gap between buildings smelled faintly like damp concrete and old rainwater. Nothing moved. Still, the glass felt slightly warm where the tapping had been. Over the next few days, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Every afternoon at 4:12 p.m. and every morning at 4:12 a.m., the tapping returned. Always the same rhythm, always the same pause between each tap, and always stopping the moment I approached the window. At first, I tried ignoring it. Then, I tried recording it on my phone. But the strange thing was that my phone microphone barely picked it up. The sound was clear when I heard it in the room, but the recording just captured faint scratches that were almost impossible to notice. Maybe the glass absorbed the sound in a strange way. Maybe my phone was just old. Or maybe something else was happening. A week later, I mentioned it casually to my neighbor across the hallway, an older man named Carter, who had lived in the building longer than anyone else. He looked at me strangely when I described the tapping. Then he asked a question I didn't expect. Your bedroom window faces the narrow alley, right? But he made a not death. Carter stared at the floor for a moment before speaking again. Did it start recently? I told him it had begun about 10 days earlier. He didn't say anything for several seconds after that. Then he simply said, "Don't open the window when you hear it." I laughed nervously and asked why, but he just shrugged and walked back into his apartment. That night I couldn't sleep. The tapping started again at 4:12 a.m. Tap. Pause. Tap. Tap. I stayed frozen under my blanket, listening carefully to the rhythm. The sound felt closer than ever, like whoever was tapping had moved their hand slightly along the glass. Tap. Tap. Something about the patterns suddenly felt familiar. Not like random knocking, more like a signal. Over the next few days, I started paying attention to the rhythm more carefully. It wasn't just random taps. It repeated the same sequence every time. 1 tap, pause, 2 taps, pause, 3 taps. Then silence. I searched online to see if the pattern meant anything in Morse code. Some combinations looked close, but nothing matched perfectly. Still, the more I listened, the more it felt intentional, like someone was trying to communicate. One afternoon, curiosity got the better of me. When the tapping started at 4:12 p.m., I walked to the window slowly and tapped back. Just once, the sound outside stopped immediately. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, something unexpected occurred. Tap. The sound returned, but this time it came from a slightly different spot on the glass. My stomach tightened. I tapped again. Tap. Tap. The answer came back. 2 taps. I remember feeling a strange mix of excitement and fear in that moment. It was the kind of feeling you get when you realize a coincidence might not actually be a coincidence. Someone or something was responding. Over the next few minutes, we continued the strange exchange. I tapped. It tapped back. Not the same rhythm anymore. Different responses. Almost like a conversation made of tiny sounds. The problem was that when I tried to look outside, I still saw nothing. Just the empty vertical corridor between buildings. No person. No ladder. No platform. Nothing that could explain how someone was reaching my 3rd floor window. That night, the tapping began earlier than usual. 4:09 a.m. I woke up instantly. Tap, tap, tap. No, pause. This time, just 3 quick taps repeated over and over. Something about the urgency made my chest feel tight. I approached the window slowly, and this time I noticed something I had missed before. There were faint marks on the glass. Tiny curved scratches, like fingernails. They were scattered across the surface in dozens of places, overlapping each other in strange patterns. Some looked fresh, some looked older. I suddenly wondered how long those marks had been there. The tapping stopped the moment my face reached the glass again, but instead of walking away, I stayed there watching. That's when I saw movement in the opposite building, not outside. Inside, in a dark apartment, directly across the narrow alley, a curtain shifted slightly. Then a pale hand pressed against the window on the other side. My heart started beating faster. The distance between our buildings was barely 6 feet, close enough that if someone leaned far out, they might reach my glass. The hand slowly tapped its own window. Tap. Pause. Tap. Tap. The same rhythm. For a moment, my brain refused to process what I was seeing, because the apartment across from mine was supposed to be empty. Carter had told me months ago that nobody lived there anymore. Still, the hand remained pressed against the opposite glass. Motionless. Waiting. I tapped my window again. Tap. The hand moved it. Tap it back. 2 taps. I leaned closer, trying to see the person behind the hand, but the room behind the glass was too dark to make out any details. All I could see was the shape of fingers. Long, thin, perfectly still except when they tapped. Over the next week, our strange tapping conversations continued every day, always at the same times, always across the narrow gap between buildings. I never saw the person's face clearly, but sometimes I caught glimpses of movement behind the curtain. A shoulder shifting, a shadow leaning closer. Once I thought I saw an eye watching me through the glass. But the light was too dim to be certain. Then something strange happened. The rhythm changed again. Instead of answering my taps, the neighbor started tapping first. 3 taps. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. Pause. Over and over again. The sound felt more urgent than before. Almost like a warning. One evening I asked Carter about the apartment across from mine. He looked uncomfortable the moment I mentioned it. That place has been empty for years, he said quietly. I told him I had seen someone in the window. Carter shook his head slowly. No one lives there. When I described the tapping, He went completely silent. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. You're not the first person in that unit to hear it. According to Carter, the last tenant in my apartment had complained about the same tapping sounds almost every night. At first, everyone thought it was construction noise from the ferry docks nearby. But the tenant eventually moved out, suddenly without telling anyone why. After that, 2 other people tried living in my apartment. Neither stayed longer than a month. No one ever explained what happened. Maybe they imagined things. Maybe something about the building walls carried sound in strange ways. But Carter avoided looking at my window when he spoke. That night, the tapping started earlier than ever. 3:58 a.m. Tap, 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 tap. Fast. Uneven. Almost frantic. I jumped out of bed and rushed to the window. The hand was already there on the opposite glass. But this time, it wasn't tapping its own window. It was reaching outward, stretching across the narrow gap. Fingers pressed against the air between our buildings, like they were trying to reach mine. The hand tapped again, 3 sharp taps. Then, something new happened. My own window vibrated slightly. Not from outside, from inside the frame. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was now coming from my side of the glass. I stepped back slowly. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. Another tap echoed directly beside me. The scratches on the glass seemed deeper now, more to the metals, like they had been made from the inside. The tapping continued, even when the hand across the alley stopped moving. Tap, pause, tap, tap. I realized with a cold wave of dread that the rhythm hadn't changed. Only the location had. For the next few nights, the tapping came from inside the window frame itself. Always at 4:12. Always the same pattern. I checked the outside of the glass during the day. No marks, no scratches. But when the tapping started, new lines appeared slowly on the surface. Thin, curved, almost like fingernails pushing outward. I tried sleeping in the living room. The tapping followed. Not on the window anymore, on the wall beside it. Tap. Pause. Tap. Tap. I moved my bed across the apartment. The sound shifted again, always near the place where my head rested, like something had learned exactly where I slept. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe exhaustion was twisting my perception. But the rhythm never changed. Then, one afternoon, I noticed something else. The apartment across the alley no longer looked empty. The curtain was open now, and a chair sat directly in front of the window. Facing me, I couldn't see the person clearly, but I could see the outline of someone sitting perfectly still in that chair, watching, waiting for 4:12. The tapping started exactly on time, but this time, it didn't come from my window. It came from behind me. 3 taps. Slow. Careful. Right against the inside wall beside my bed. I turned around slowly. Nothing was there, but the tapping continued. Tap. Pause. Tap. Tap. Then I heard something else. A faint scratching sound inside the drywall, like fingernails moving slowly through hollow space. That night, I didn't sleep at all. The tapping happened at both times again, and every time it came from somewhere closer to me than before. Window, wall, bed frame, floor. Like whatever made the sound was learning how to move inside the apartment, across the alley. The figure in the chair never moved, not once, just sitting there, watching. 3 nights later, the tapping stopped completely. For the first time in weeks, the apartment was silent. No rhythm, no scratches, nothing. I thought it was finally over. The noise may have been some strange building problem after all. My brain may have been too tired to process it correctly. But then something happened that I still cannot fully explain. When I looked at the window that morning, the glass was completely covered in fingernail scratches, hundreds of them, all pointing outward, as if something inside the room had been trying to get out. I moved out of that apartment 2 days later. I never told the landlord why, but a week after leaving, I walked past the building again out of curiosity. Someone new had already moved into my old unit. That evening, as I stood across the street, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. At exactly for 12 p.m., the new tenant walked toward the bedroom window. He looked confused. Then he leaned closer to the glass, and from the outside sidewalk where I stood, I heard it too. Tap. Pause. Tap. 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 If you made it this far listening to this confession on Unblinking, tell me something in the comments. Have you ever heard a sound in your home that no one else believed? And if you know someone who enjoys slow, psychological horror like this, share this video with them. Because sometimes the scariest stories aren't about monsters. Sometimes they're about small sounds that keep repeating long after you've left the room. And even months later, there is one thing I still can't explain. Every once in a while, when my new apartment becomes completely silent, I wake up at exactly for 12 in the morning, and for a few seconds before I fully open my eyes, I think I hear tapping on the glass again.